Hello and welcome back to Pop Culture Graveyard. I am Hollis. Today I want to talk about The Jam, one of the best bands the UK punk scene produced. Though they weren't really punks, they appealed to everyone. If you liked the Buzzcocks or if you liked the early Who, you would like The Jam. The Jam. The Jam formed in Woking, Surrey, England in 1972. About 24 minutes by train to Waterloo Station. About 23 miles southwest of Charing Cross in central London. Oh, did you not want to go to Woking? The Jam were one of the tightest bands around, and there's a very good reason for that. They met as children. They were in school together, and they used to have these jam sessions, hence the name The Jam. And there were about 37 guys in The Jam. By the time they left school, there were only 3. The Jam we all know and love. Paul Weller, guitar and vocals and chief songwriter, Rick Buckler on drums, and Bruce Foxton on bass and sometimes vocals. They were signed in 1977 by Chris Parry, the same guy behind The Cure and Fiction Records. They wound up on Polygram Records, where Chris Parry was an A&R man. They quickly built up a reputation as a fantastic live band, and in May of 1977 they dropped In the City. This album is pure adrenaline. The Jam at this point were so tight and well rehearsed that they laid down the entire album in 10 days. In the City is a punk record, the same way that The Replacements' Sorry Ma, I Forgot to Take Out the Trash is a hardcore record. It's not really. They're doing enough ranting and raving, and there's enough great energy on this album to be considered punk. But the only things punk about it is the energy and the creativity and the uniqueness of their sound and their presentation. One of the great things about punk at that time is that you could be anyone you wanted. You could look any way you wanted, dress any way you wanted. It would soon become a uniform, which the Jam were not wearing. They would wear clean suits that harkened back to the early 60s mod scene. But at the time they came out, they fit in nicely to the UK punk scene. As far as Jam albums go, this is a good beginning for them, but it's not a magical album. The album kicks off with Art School. Everything you need to know about the early Jam is crammed into the 2 minutes and 2 seconds of Art School. It begins with a Pete Townsend-like guitar intro, not unlike the guitar intro to Any Way, Anyhow, Anywhere by the early Who. It feels like a real throwback number because it's got that early high-energy R&B feel, but it's very much of its time, and it's an explosive, raw power pop song. The second great song on here is the title track, In the City. It was the only single from the album, and it really put the Jam on the map. In the City has everything you would want in a punk single. Jagged guitars, rock-solid drumming, and infectious vocals. There are a couple more cool songs on here. I Got By in Time has some of Paul's best vocals, very, very soulful. And Away from the Numbers is the best song that the early Who never wrote. There are 2 covers on the album. One is the Batman theme by Neil Hefti from the TV show in '66. It might seem an odd choice, but so many other punk bands at the time covered the Batman theme, believe it or not. The other cover is a track called Slow Down by Larry Williams, a song from 1957. And it might seem a strange choice at first, but the Beatles had already covered Slow Down, along with another Larry Williams track, Dizzy Miss Lizzy. And the Jam, especially leader Paul Weller, were Beatles fans, so it made total sense for them to cover it, because Larry's original is a really rockin' track. And the version they do on here really makes the Beatles version sound tame by comparison. This is a very good album. It's great by other band standards, and it was a good start for the Jam. But given where the Jam were headed, this is looked upon as a sort of uneven beginning. Still a very good album. This album actually entered the UK charts at number 40. So right out of the gate, the Jam were very popular. In between the Jam's first album and their second album, they came out with a single, All Around the World, that made it to number 13 in the UK singles charts. And in November of 1977, they dropped their second album that same year, This Is the Modern World. Incidentally, the band toured this album as the opening act in America for Blue Oyster Cult. And the Blue Oyster Cult audiences, how can I say this, did not care for the Jam. Who'd have thought? This is what the Blue Oyster Cult audience was seeing. After the first couple of numbers, the chorus of boos was deafening. I don't know though, you're standing around in your earth shoes, smoking a doobie, this might be a little too high energy for you, so I sort of get it. But I'd like to think that at least 5 to 10 Blue Oyster Cult fans walked out of that concert, cut their hair, put on a skinny tie, and started listening to things like The Jam. I'm a dreamer. This album is very much a sophomore slump for them, according to most people. But there's still great stuff on this. The album starts out great, with the first two world tracks, The Modern World and All Around the World. Two very good Jam songs. But then the rest of side one continues, and it sounds great. It sounds like you should really like it, but the music and lyrics themselves feel a bit lazy. Songs like London Traffic was a basic rave-up that wouldn't have been out of place on the first album. Fun, but not special. The execution is there, but not the energy. It's very much got some of the same themes and trods a lot of the same ground of the first album. So there's not much new for you here. Still, I have a few underrated tracks I like. Here Comes the Weekend and Tonight at Noon are a couple of songs that I feel are a cut above. This album unfortunately coincided with a devastating bout of writer's block for Paul Weller, which is the reason you find two Bruce Foxton songs on this album, London Traffic and Don't Tell Them You're Sane. You also find a somewhat faithful rendition of the old Wilson Pickett song In the Midnight Hour, which ends the first side. This album is what record companies are always saying they want from bands, a continuation of the first successful album. Well, guess what? The record company got exactly what they wanted, and critics and fans didn't want it. After a musical revolution, people want to see a little musical evolution. At this point, people were expecting a lot more from Paul Weller, and they were about to get it. All Mod Cons was released in January of 1978. Everything great about the Jam begins here. Yeah, it's their third, but really it's like their first. Fuck out of here, you pretentious prick. But he's right. This is my favorite Jam album. It is the quintessential mod rock, neo mod, new jack mod, mod pop punk, mod punk album. This is a massive step up for the band. Songwriting wise, execution wise, musically, they could all play their instruments so much better by now. This is where the greatness of the Jam begins. Every single track on this album is a killer. First of all, the cover, just the joke of it. All Mod Cons, of course, is real estate speak for all modern conveniences when showing an apartment. It was really just a way to get the word mod in for Paul Weller. But it's an empty room. These are the Mod Cons. They are the mod conveniences. The back has each of their instruments as the modern conveniences. It's a great album design. The first two albums were jointly produced by Chris Parry and Vic Coopersmith-Heaven. This album would solely be produced by Vic Coopersmith-Heaven, who got along great with the band. Vic Coopersmith-Heaven was the engineer on Honky Tonk Women by the Stones, and his first production job was Turning Japanese by the Vapors. That's how you start producing. This has fantastic production. Perfect early 60s mod guitar sound, crisp, clear vocals, super tight rhythm section. They never sounded this good before. Paul was very influenced by Kinks music when writing this album, and they even do a Kinks cover. They released a double A-sided single for this album. It was David Watts, which is a cover of a Kinks song, and the B-side was A-Bomb in Wardour Street, which is all about the menacing undercurrent of violence at every live gig at the time. All Mod Cons, To Be Someone, Mr. Clean. This album has no let-up. I Love Billy Hunt, the song that kicks off side 2. Incidentally, this is a British pressing. On both UK and US first pressings, Billy Hunt leads off side 2. Later pressings replace it with Butterfly Collector. As much as I love Butterfly Collector, I highly recommend that you get an original pressing if you can, because the sequencing is just perfection. I highly recommend the British pressing though, because another thing it has over the US pressing is the fantastic design. I mean, that's just a beautiful 60s mod design on that label, so I highly recommend that you pick up the UK pressing if you can. There are actually 6 tracks on side 1, though there are only 5 tracks listed. Paul Weller chose not to list the song English Rose on the album jacket or to include the lyrics with it. Paul said he didn't want the lyrics listed because he felt that it wouldn't mean much without the music, but I think he was a little self-conscious because it was very rare to write a love song in those violent early UK punk scene days. But it is a breathtakingly beautiful song. The song can be taken both literally, that no matter where he goes, he always comes back to the English girl that he loves, or it can be taken figuratively, that no matter where he travels, he always comes back to his beautiful home of England because he loves her. Either way, the song works. One of the best songs on this album is Down in the Tube Station at Midnight, which is a story song, much like the songs that Ray Davies wrote for the Kinks. And it's sort of a subway as hell song, where this poor guy is coming home from work with some takeaway curry, and he's headed home to his wife, but he's beat up by toughs. They take his house key. He's lying there envisioning the future horror, that they're gonna come in his house. His wife will think it's him. Oh, terrible. Come on, come on. When I'm in the Crowd is a great song. Paul said he was influenced by Mick Jones' Lost in the Supermarket when he wrote that. The death of individuality, the ugly strength of the mob. There are a lot of anti-violence themes on this album. The band was already sick of the malevolent feeling of the live music scene at that time. It's reflected in the lyrics. It's Too Bad, All Mod Cons, A-Bomb and Wardour Street. These are my favorite songs off this album. You cannot go wrong purchasing this album. It is the perfect introduction to the Jam, and I really think you should start here. In November of 1979, the band released Setting Suns. This is a very worthy follow-up to All Mod Cons. There's a great progression here, songcraft-wise and musical execution-wise. I slept on this album for years. I originally had a UK pressing, which only had 10 tracks and lousy sequencing. UK pressings sound like they'd be the best things to get for UK bands. Not always true. All Beatles and Stones fans can tell you that. This is a Canadian pressing I got, and I feel if you're going to purchase this album, hunt down a Canadian pressing. The US pressing added the single Strangetown, which wasn't on the British pressing. But the Canadian version not only adds Strangetown, but it also adds that single's B-side, Butterfly Collector. It also rejiggers the entire sequencing. That is the ideal sequencing for this album, except no substitute. The single off this album was the Eton Rifles. Eton is a very elitist school where the current rulers of England have gone and where the future leaders of England now go. The B-side is Seesaw, which is a nifty little song, but the Eton Rifles is one of their all-time great songs. Paul was inspired to write the Eton Rifles after watching footage on TV of a Right to Work march that went past the Eton School, and some of the students had come outside and were jeering at the protesters. It's a beautiful jumble of ideas about class warfare. The Jam actually tried to record the Eton Rifles for All Mod Cons. They tried 2 times to record it for the album. They just couldn't get it down. It didn't sound powerful enough. And when they were finishing up Setting Suns, their producer said to them, hey, why don't we just try doing that again? And the 3rd time was the charm, because the song came out perfect. Paul Weller even led about 30 Jam fans into the studio to help out on the choruses. So it's a really high watermark musically for the early Jam. My favorite 3 songs on the album are all in a row: Private Hell, The Butterfly Collector, and Burning Sky. This 1-2-3 punch really hits hard. They're very downbeat, somber tracks, yet at the same time I always feel uplifted after hearing them. All 3 of those are my deep cuts on this album. The Jam still have 1 cover on this, and that's Heatwave, Love is Laika. So the Jam at this point just keep getting better and better, but they were about to go through the roof. Released in November of 1980, Sound Effects. If All Mod Cons were their Something Else by the Kinks, then Sound Effects is their The Kinks Are the Village Green Preservation Society. Sound Effects for years and years was my favorite all-time Jam album. Even now, when my favorite album is All Mod Cons, I acknowledge that their best collection of songs is on Sound Effects. Start, which kicks it off, kind of lifts the bass line and guitar line from Taxman by George Harrison, but no one minded, even George. One of their best songs. It's Bruce Foxton's best work on bass. Pretty Green is a perfect song. Monday is a moody, atmospheric track. But I'm Different Now almost harkens back to the first album. Outlandishly hooky guitar part. Set the House Ablaze is some of their finest musical work as a combo. The album just keeps hitting. That's Entertainment Are you kidding me? Just a taste of the lyrics. Two lovers kissing amongst the scream of midnight. Two lovers missing the tranquility of solitude. Getting a cab and traveling on buses. Reading the graffiti about slashed seat affairs. Come on. That's nuts. That's entertainment. And that's nuts. Man in the Corner Shop is one of my favorite tracks off this. It's my deep cut. It's a Hollis heat seeker off this album. It's so charming. Charm. I keep coming back to the word charm with this band. It's all about the classes in England, about how they each envy each other's lot in life. Oh, he's got it easy. Oh, that guy's got it easy. This one's got it easy. Meanwhile, they're all admiring each other. Boy About Town is one of the most fun songs you're going to hear from the Jam. It's maybe their top 3 on the fun meter. This is seen as the high water mark. It's Paul Weller's favorite album by the band. You can't go wrong owning this album. If you own only one album by them, I totally understand if it's this one. This, incidentally, would be their last album made with Vic Coopersmith Heaven, so I don't have to say that name anymore. The Jam were becoming very, very popular in England, but they were also getting a bunch of fans over here. And for those fans, in US and Canada, in 1981, the Jam EP was released. This has 5 songs from 3 different singles. Absolute Beginners, with the B-side Tales from the Riverbank, Funeral Pyre, and its B-side Disguises, and the B-side from the Start single, which is Liza Radley. Incidentally, the Start single cover has always cracked me up. It's just a little regular disc cover in white, and it just says Start with an exclamation point. It's charming. Anyway, these songs are phenomenal. Absolute Beginners, when the horns kick it off, you're like, what is this? Who is this band? They're a totally different band. They're a dance band. Tales from the Riverbank, a slow, sexy, gothic track. Funeral Pyre, if you really like heavy rhythmic stuff, check out Funeral Pyre first if you're looking to get into the Jam. The drumming on Funeral Pyre, the bass playing on Funeral Pyre, and for a band with a title like The Jam, who grew up together jamming for years, for this to be the first single that they all wrote together is kind of mind-boggling. But it just goes to show you it started out as a track that the rhythm section was working up. So Bruce and Rick really put the fire in that track, and then Paul came and put the magic on top of it. Disguises is a cover of an early Who song, a really charming little song written by Pete Townsend back in the day. And Liza Radley is just a really sweet little acoustic ballad. This EP packs a real punch. Absolute Beginners shows you where Paul Weller was starting to go songwriting-wise. He was getting more and more influenced by Motown. He was getting more and more influenced by the work of Curtis Mayfield, one of the greatest artists that America ever produced. So if you see this anywhere, jump on it. Run, Don't Walk. Released in March of 1982, The Gift. By the time of this album, leader Paul Weller had a full-blown addiction to Curtis Mayfield. It happens to a lot of musicians. Who can blame them? Curtis rules. You get more horns on this album, along with more guitar and soul-infused vocals. Check out the song Precious to hear what I'm talking about. The result is kind of a hybrid album. You'd be excused if you saw The Gift as the first toe in the water for Paul's later group, The Style Council. The producer was Peter Wilson. He had previously done Sham 69's Angels with Dirty Faces. So why not clean up his act a bit? Would go on to produce the first EP by The Style Council, and then their first 2 LPs. So Paul really liked working with Peter Wilson. There are some great songs on here, though you can kind of tell that Paul has one foot out the door of the Jam already. Door Jam? A Town Called Malice is of course a great song. It is the one Jam song that people who don't know the Jam know. I'm not a particular fan of A Town Called Malice. It's just a little too close to You Can't Hurry Love for my liking. That keeps me at arm's length as far as enjoying it. That said, it's a great song. The Planner's Dream Goes Wrong is another charming slice of life a la Ray Davies. Happy Together is good. Transglobal Express. I'm a fan of Just Who Is the 5 O'Clock Hero. And Carnation is an underrated song on this album. It is a sweet, gentle song that almost harkens back to the English Rose style of songwriting from Paul. So if you're going to check out this album, I highly recommend that you look up Carnation and Just Who Is the 5 O'Clock Hero. They're my 2 favorite songs off this album. So it's a great album, but the end was near. The Jam finished up their career with 2 great singles. The Bitterest Pill I've Ever Had to Swallow, and Beat Surrender. They came out in that order. Each of these were produced by Peter Wilson. Each one is a beautiful slice of the Jam. The Bitterest Pill you could have heard on Setting Suns. It sounds kind of like that Jam. Other songs on it are Pity Poor Alfie, cover of Fever. They also do a cover of War on here, which is known in the US by Edwin Starr. Beat Surrender also features War. Side 1 of Beat Surrender is great. The single, of course, has the great line, "Bullshit is bullshit, it just goes by different names." When they did Top of the Pops, they had to mime to the edited line, which was "Bullfrogs are bullfrogs, they just go by different names." That's so much worse than the Rolling Stones' "Let's Spend Some Time Together" on The Ed Sullivan Show. "Bullshit to Bullfrogs" is some next level compromising. However, it's a great single. Both of them are great singles. Side 2 features Move On Up by Curtis Mayfield, Stoned Out of My Mind, another cover, and War. Paul was clearly done with the Jam and putting them to bed and wanted this to be a final statement on the band. It's like side 1 is for you guys. This is the Jam. Side B, I'm out of here. I'm doing the Style Council. And I got nothing bad to say about the Style Council. They're great. For Jam fans who wanted more from the band, they got a live album, Dig the New Breed. There are songs from each of their albums, from In the City all the way up through The Gift. There are even songs you couldn't get somewhere else, like Big Bird. So for fans that were lamenting the loss of the live show, they could go out and buy the live album. Incidentally, the dates for all of the live gigs on the inner sleeve are all wrong, but at the time they put down what they thought were the right dates. But this is a pretty good album. It's great to hear songs of all the different eras, because they were a totally different band by the end of their career than they were from the beginning, as most good bands should be. For most of you, you'll probably never need anything other than Snap. This is a double album, and it's got really everything anyone could ever want by the Jam if you're not a hardcore fan, and I highly recommend it. It sounds great. It also came out on CD as Compact Snap. A lot of great songs. This is them recording the video for News of the World. I love the Jam. I hope you do too. There's more product that came out. Jam Extras. This has an awful lot of B-sides and cover songs that you can't get anywhere else, so I highly recommend that. There's a better live album that came out after the fact. It features 24 tracks. They're really crisp live recordings done from different periods in their career, from All Mod Cons through the end. This is a far better live album than Dig the New Breed, in my estimation. And they even have the proper dates for them. All of the great live tracks you want are on here. Finally, there's a compilation, Fire and Skill, the songs of the Jam. If you want sort of a skeleton key for unlocking the sound of the Jam, maybe hearing artists you already know cover the songs will do it for you. There are great covers on here. Garbage does the Butterfly Collector. Beastie Boys featuring Miho Hattori from Chibomato do Start, and it's really adorable. Everything But the Girl, Buffalo Tom, Ben Harper, Gene, Liam Gallagher and Steve Craddock do Carnation. Noel Gallagher does To Be Someone. So the two Gallagher boys based their entire career and their hairstyle off of the Jam. Really cool comp. That is it. I'm all jammed up. That's it for this week on Pop Culture Graveyard. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, please subscribe, and I will see you next week with a lot more cool stuff.